Hey everyone, I hope that you had a nice spring break. I just got through reading the discussion on Migra. I really enjoyed the kinds of questions that you were asking, specifically about sources. And that's something that I've been thinking quite a bit about as I've reread the book along with you. Um, and I also appreciate the way that so many of you emphasized Hernandez's main argument, which is that white supremacy, racial profiling were all intertwined with the formation of the Border Patrol, but that wasn't necessarily just because of a national initiative. That was because of the way that the Border Patrol took shape locally on the ground along the border, because of the people who got involved with it, how it professionalized over time, and the role that the Mexican government played in policing the border as well. So she talks a little bit about the analog to the Border Patrol in Mexico, their institution, and that's something that doesn't get a lot of attention. Typically in histories of the Border Patrol, or of this kind of policing that she's engaged with. So as we turn to the blog post this week, I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit more about the fact that she brought in all of those Mexican sources to bear on the border as well. And that's something that, interestingly in Borderlands history doesn't always happen. All too often, sources can be very heavily on one side or the other. And I would still say that her sources still lean heavily toward the U.S. Border Patrol side of the equation. But she also did a lot of work indexing the sources of the INM, the counterpart in Mexico, as well. And this was something I commented to some of you on the discussion board. With her sources, we were being critical of them, rightfully so, because she had to do so much work digging these things out of people's garages and back rooms and all of this. And that happened a bit, but what she's really talking about is that the sources that we have in archives, they belong to people at one point. And so a lot of the sources that she worked with for the Border Patrol either were still in the hands of those people or they had been kind of forgotten. She talks about the musty warehouse, the records that have been long forgotten, not processed, and she did work to catalog all of those things. So not only did she, consult these kinds of what became archival sources, but she also had to catalog them and organize them first. And in the process of cataloging, that's when, usually archivists, but sometimes researchers will participate. That's when provenance is established. And so that's a word that we didn't throw around in the discussion, but provenance is huge for those in archival studies, because that's essentially the chain of evidence, for lack of a better way of saying it. This is how we know that this is a genuine source, that we not necessarily can trust it, because trusting what the source says is different than just trusting that this is an actual legitimate source that is what it says it is. It is a letter from 1932 or whatever. That's about the provenance. The information contained within, though, is always going to be imperfect because the historical record is based on the opinions and perspectives of human beings. So it's the perspective of whatever person connected to the Border Patrol or impacted by the Border Patrol. We're getting their perspectives, and that's why it's so important to locate as many sources and as many perspectives as possible when trying to understand the past, because there's not a definitive source on any topic. There's not going to be a definitive book on any topic either. And so to that end, as we're working on our second pass through Migra, and we're thinking about the Mexican sources and the Mexican side of the story a little more, I want to offer a little extra credit if you're interested. You don't always take me up on this, but I think some of these exercises are kind of, they're important and they're helpful because these are things that as I was studying history in my undergrad program and even in graduate school, I had never been taught some of the skills of historical study. And so I like to try to emphasize them when I can. So this time, as you're going back through Migra, I want you to find a passage. It can be any passage in the book, a paragraph, a few sentences, that shows both an example of historical evidence. So historical evidence is the actual cited material from the archival source or from the source. It doesn't have to be archival, but I keep using that example. But from the primary source. And an example of the interpretation of that source. So sometimes it can be difficult to disentangle what's coming from the source and what is the author's interpretation. And so it's a good exercise to see if you can take a passage and say, okay, here's where the actual source is, the facts, this perspective from whatever that primary source was, and here is the sentence where the author is interpreting it and explaining how and why this source supports her argument. If you do that, again, I'm just leaving it open. You can pick any paragraph, any set of sentences in the book. Just post it as a response to this video, and it's a way of earning extra credit, and it might foster some conversation amongst us about, how could you tell which was which? Sometimes it's really easy, sometimes it's not. And that's just part of the exercise I wanted to have you engage with. Hopefully it'll also help you as you prepare to write your blog post this week. All right, I think I'll leave it there. I hope that you're having a good week, and I will talk to you all soon.